The power of voice, not just metaphorically or figuratively, but literally. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Our voices are expressions of that which lies at our core, in the depth of our being. It is the expression, the articulation of what is. Ring with the harmonies of liberty. Liberty, freedom from external rule, independence, freedom from control, interference, obligation, restriction, hampering conditions, power or right of doing, thinking, speaking, according to choice. A freedom often restricted, tampered with, confined in this country by your sex and the color of your skin. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod. I work in the nonprofit sector, a sector birthed from the perils of our communities. Although we have shifted our language from charity to mission focused, and in most cases, our perspective from a poverty mindset to an assets-based approach, we have somehow still managed to overlook one critical piece: inclusivity. While we now understand the lingering damage and destruction of myths such as the welfare queen and the super predator, we steadily miss the mark in the C-suite and in the boardroom. On average, we see that those in direct service roles having primary interface with clients, members, those receiving services, track at about 35% people of color. That number drops down to as low as 8% when we shift to the executive director or the CEO role. This disproportionate representation leads to divisive engagement strategies, cultural exclusion, and ultimately inadequate interventions. I'm reminded of a major yet effective sex trafficking campaign here in our region, which unintentionally yet systematically overlooked areas where Latinx and African American girls were being targeted and victims of sex trafficking. Felt in the days when hope, unborn, had died. This dynamic is not just limited to the nonprofit sector. Let's consider politics. Don't worry, this talk won't get too political, but even that choice, the ability to choose not to make a topic, an issue that is a very real and significant reality for some of us, politicized, is in itself an exercise of power and privilege. But back to the non-politics of politics. This past election proved an age-old theory correct: every vote counts. And while I can seemingly freely exercise my voice through the ballot box, the slate of names presented before me represent a direct indication of both financial and social capital. In most cases, this capital has been secured through generations of systemic advantages, access to wealth, and most importantly, a lack of targeted physical and psychological warfare, as the case with people of color. Of the 90 women serving in statewide elective executive offices, only 16 are women of color. The fact of the matter is, campaigns cost money, time, and capacity, all of which become more and more scarce with the increasing darkness, the hue of your skin. Yet with a steady beat, have not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers sighed? Unfortunately, these realities are just the tip of the iceberg. If we zoom out and take a look from a systems level, it becomes painstakingly clear that institutions, agencies, and entire infrastructures were designed and continue to be maintained based on these disparities. The field of gynecology was literally founded on the non-consenting, unmedicated bodies of enslaved women. Yet today, we diet rates comparable to third world countries during childbirth. African American children are much less likely than children of other races to be enrolled in early childhood programs that score highest on caregiver sensitivity and are much more likely to be in programs that score the lowest. Yet, African American women represent the largest representation percentage-wise of post-secondary degree attainment. Somehow, even with the accolades and all the ABCs, as my mentor calls them, behind our names, Black women have to work an extra 8 months to achieve the same annual pay as their white male counterparts. Perhaps it's time to rethink those unpaid internships and instead pay Black women. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, Thou who has brought us thus far on the way. Political activist Arundhati Roy let it be known that there's really no such thing as the voiceless. There are only the deliberately silenced or preferably unheard. This pandemic has gifted us an opportunity to make visible the very backbone of our economy and livelihood, essential workers. The labor necessary to keep food on our tables, medicine on our shelves, and hospitals and clinics clean and sanitary falls disproportionately on the physical backs of Black and brown bodies. We've highlighted an entire spectrum of ways in which historical and current systems have intentionally muffled and distorted the voices of women of color, as well as the intended and unintended consequences of this erasure. Thou who has by thy might led us into the light. So where do we go from here? How do we confront day after day these realities with hope, aspiration, yet pragmatic solutions? First and foremost, we must create space for the lived experiences of women of color. We must deconstruct the implications of patriarchy, which makes invisible the intensity and very real burden of home and family care, ailments and care that is deeply needed specifically for bodies housing a uterus, and the mental and emotional needs of women in the workplace. As we seek to return to better, not normal, finding strategies to grow our circle of awareness to include and ultimately normalize the perspectives, values, and concerns of women of color, centering them in our conversations and decision-making becomes an absolute non-negotiable. As we seek to draw nearer to the very real lived experiences of women of color, we must simultaneously call out implicit and explicit bias reflected in our policies and practices. Explicit biases are most successfully addressed via careful examination of policies such as paid time off, versatility in the work schedule, recruitment and hiring practices, as well as performance and evaluation processes. How do we intentionally and explicitly honor and value lived direct experiences compared to academic achievement? These policy shifts are most effective when supported by targeted implicit bias interventions. Shifting from the macro to the micro, we must remember that organizations are made up of people. And each of these individuals brings with them their very own cycle of socialization and various ways of making meaning of the world around them. Taking the time to explore individuals' understanding of self in relation to associations across those lines of difference is a powerful and necessary step in shifting organizational culture and very directly creates footing for safer, more affirming work environments for all. Finally, it is our duty to identify and curate pipelines of engagement which intentionally diversify the voices reflected and represented at every table. Advocating for and investing in learning cohorts which help to even the playing field while successfully providing the preparation needed for candidates to take positions of influence. We can support training programs with strategic measurables around increasing access for qualified individuals while broadening our own indicators for those qualifications beyond our own historical understanding. Reserving positions in developmental programs, sector-specific internships and externships, and even board placement for individuals reflecting diversity with their experience, their perspectives, and various dimensions of their identity are all long overdue steps for acknowledging and amplifying voices which have been deliberately silenced. This journey requires a harmonious choir of voices, voices seeking to reject, restore, embrace, and reclaim. A rejection of white supremacy and misogynistic theories, their practices and embodiment. Restoration of autonomy over our physical and spiritual as well as emotional health. An unapologetic embrace of indigenous and edifying practices, understandings, thoughts, and processes, and a reclamation of our time, our talent, and our treasure. Shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand true to our God, true to our native land. Thank you.